folks. I'm going to discuss an issue that may seem monotonous to you, but it's not. It's an issue that we can discuss in a way that won't be monotonous, but it's important because it is the next line of attack against the President of the United States and his family. It's called the Emoluments Clause. The Emoluments Clause. People are throwing around the clause, throwing around the word, and they don't know what they're talking about, including some judges. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8. No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept of any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. You have a President of the United States who's a multi-billionaire, enormously successful man. He's essentially put all his business activities either in a trust or turned them over to his children. And yet the suggestion is that he can be bought because foreign dignitaries, among others, are staying at his hotel in Washington, D.C. And therefore, the argument goes, he is violating the Constitution's Emoluments Clause because he's accepting gifts or grants from foreign governments. This is laughable, and yet now a federal district court in Maryland, a Clinton appointee, has not only accepted the case, but is supporting it. All right, let's get back to this. The Emoluments Clause. What was the Emoluments Clause about? We go to the Congressional Research Service. There's many places to look. They say, review of the debates of the Constitutional Convention in 1787 reveals a nearly universal agreement with respect to the general purpose of the Emoluments Clause. The delegates believe that express protection against possible corruption of members of the legislature from the lure of civil office was necessary. Specifically, the delegates feared that election to Congress would be seen merely as a stepping stone to more lucrative public office, and that members would use their legislative positions to create or increase the compensation of such offices. In addition, the delegates feared the growth of an overly powerful executive branch that could use the enticement of public office to influence members of the legislature. Okay, so none of that is relevant here. None of that is relevant here. Donald Trump isn't using the office of the presidency or the Trump various business ventures in order to try and pave his way to a higher office. That's not possible. That's not possible. Donald Trump is an elected president of the United States for the purpose of enriching himself. That would be a funny way of going about it, running for president of the United States. We're talking about a hotel in Washington, D.C., where individuals decide whether or not they're going to stay at that hotel. I stayed there one night. It is a magnificent hotel. So the Emoluments Clause would seem to have nothing at all to do with this, would it? So what's going on? Why does any of this matter? Here's NPR. Trump emoluments case, a blast of subpoenas and a politically risky schedule. In a case that could shed light on the finances of the secretive Trump organization, a federal judge has signed orders to issue 30 subpoenas on behalf of the attorneys general of Maryland and the District of Columbia in their lawsuit alleging that President Trump is profiting from foreign and state government spending at the Trump International Hotel in downtown Washington, D.C. Do you see how they have completely perverted that provision of the Constitution? Trump owns a stake in the hotel, and profits from those sources would appear to violate the Constitution's bans on gifts from foreign and state governments. These aren't gifts from foreign and state governments. And remember again, their purpose is to prevent a public official from using their position to try and grease the skids to get a higher position or to get a higher position that pays more money. Well, that's not this. So Trump owns a stake in the hotel, and profits from those sources would appear to violate the Constitution's bans on gifts from foreign and state governments. No, it doesn't. As D.C. Attorney General Carl Racine called them, our nation's original anti-corruption laws. Subpoenas are directed to 13 entities attached to President Trump, ranging from several involved with the hotel up to Trump's umbrella entity, the Trump Organization, and the revocable trust that his lawyers created to insulate him from issues like the Emoluments lawsuit. And so you have to wonder, first of all, how do the attorneys general of Maryland and Washington, D.C. have standing? How do they have standing? You can't just bring lawsuits, ladies and gentlemen, because you think something's wrong or you're trying to push a political agenda. What is the standing of a state in the District of Columbia to bring this lawsuit? They have no standing. But I'll get to that later. Maryland Attorney General Brian Frosh told NPR those subpoenas are aimed at establishing which foreign governments and which domestic governments are paying the Trump Post Office Hotel, then where it's going, and how is the Trump Hotel affecting the hospitality industry in D.C. and Maryland. The lawsuit is based on an argument that the hotel with a presidential boost is taking business from other establishments. Now, the Department of Justice, I understand it, is seeking an appeal, maybe an interlocutory appeal. I don't know what kind of appeal. This is utterly bogus. So this is their argument on standing. Well, look, we got to see if they're taking business from other establishments here. And so therefore we need to find everything we can about Trump Hotel, Trump World, Trump Finances, the Trump Trust. It's preposterous. The Internal Revenue Service and 4 other federal agencies will also get subpoenas. Frosh said the IRS would likely have Trump Organization records showing how much money they took in, how much money they spent, if they identified the sources of the income. He said Trump's tax returns are not included in the request for information about Trump's business dealings. This is a completely bogus lawsuit. Neither Maryland nor D.C. have standing, and it is a complete perversion of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. And yet you'll see none of that in the reporting. The documents sought in the subpoenas are one part of the evidence now being gathered. Federal District Judge Peter Messitt, M-E-S-S-I-T-T in Maryland, set the evidence gathering to end August 2019. Now, why is that important, ladies and gentlemen? It coincides with the Iowa State Fair, one of the first big events of the 2020 presidential campaign, and a trial would follow. In other words, the Trump emoluments case could hit the headlines just as the president is revving up his reelection campaign. Now, this is a federal judge, a Clinton appointee, Mr. Chief Justice Roberts. This is a federal judge. Let's see here. Donald Kettle, academic director of the University of Texas LBJ School, Washington Center, said the timing has risks for the president. Notice the nature of the article. Timing is risk for the president, this, that, and the other. They're carrying water for a bogus lawsuit in an outrageous judge. And then they get some phony expert. It has risks for the president? This is another setup. If it turns out that now there are suggestions and maybe evidence presented, there are people who at least took advantage of the Trump Hotel in Washington to try to curry favor, it's going to continue to stir a pot that the president would surely wish were left unstirred, he said. What does that mean? Stir a pot for what? If it turns out now there are suggestions and maybe evidence. Suggestions and maybe evidence? Kettle said the case, if it goes against Trump, could also bolster support for special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. How? What does that have to do with anything? And while it's unclear how many subpoenaed documents will become public, the plaintiff's approach in this case could provide a roadmap for investigative journalists or oversight-minded House Democrats who will wield the majority in the new Congress beginning next year. The Emoluments Clause of the Constitution has languished in legal obscurity, they write, for most of the past 2 centuries and never been tested in court in this way. It's never been tested in court in this way because these are outrageous individuals bringing these cases. The Kennedys never had cases like this brought about their investments. The Johnsons, Lyndon Johnson, they never had cases brought about their investments. There have been wealthy people in office before, not as wealthy as Trump as president, but still. So now we have another tool that will apparently be used by the left. And if they can find these Clinton and Obama judges to try and destroy the Trump presidency. And it's a damn about time that the so-called conservative commentators speak out in unison against this. Because whatever they feel about a particular aspect of Trump and Trump policies and so forth, you would think at least we could unite around the Constitution. They have perverted the Emoluments Clause. A case like this has never been brought. 30 subpoenas upheld, supported by a federal judge appointed by Clinton. And somehow this relates to 2016 in the Mueller investigation? These people are insane. Phil, Raleigh, North Carolina, on the Mark Levin app. Go, sir.
Sir, good afternoon. Good evening. It's a pleasure to speak with you, Mark. I have a quick question. So I'm in the finance profession, and I was wondering what your take on the fact that any federal official with this court procedure is effective with President Trump could be held accountable for violating the Emoluments Clause if they hold any security instrument whatsoever, whether it's a stock or a bond or an exchange-traded fund, or for that matter, any stake in a partnership that has anything to do with a state or foreign government.
That's a very legitimate question, because it sounds like this court and these knucklehead attorneys general who are just trying to make political points, they're opening Pandora's box, aren't they? So if you own a mutual fund, let's say you're a senator, and you're right, you own financial instruments, mutual funds or whatever, and they invest in foreign countries, or they invest in businesses in foreign countries. What about that? Might not your point is, or stocks, might that not affect the way you conduct yourself from an official point of view, right?
Absolutely. Well, and partnerships can be highly complex. I can easily own a 1% stake in a partnership, that manages a hotel that a foreign government might stay in. And so the court is going to have to determine where you draw the line as well. Is it a 1% stake, or is it a 20% stake, or how active does your management of the partnership have to be before you're violating the Emoluments Clause? I see this as a hugely dangerous proposition for the Republic.
It is. And but anything goes when it comes to Trump. If they can take him out, the destruction of the Constitution and undermining the country doesn't seem to matter. It just doesn't. But I wanted to explain this because the Emoluments Clause is in there. It's very rarely raised. It's never been litigated. And so now it is being litigated in a way, as I say, that it's unprecedented. The interpretation is ridiculous. The standing doesn't exist, but the judge conferred it on these two knuckleheads anyway. And the judge obviously is not a real judge. He is a politician in black robes. All right, Phil, thanks for your call. Excellent call. Let us go to John, Las Cruces, New Mexico, Sirius Satellite. How are you?
I'm excellent. I just had a quick question. Wouldn't this one hotel, even if he profits from it, it's so small and compared to his entire, holdings, wouldn't that fall into the concept of de minimis? I don't understand that, but I had a case once that the government kind of dismissed because it was so small, they didn't bother with it. So I was wondering if you could explain that.
Well, I'll explain it. And the answer is yes. In other words, the purpose of the Emoluments Clause is to prevent people, they were thinking of congressmen at the time, run for office, gain office, then use that office to enrich themselves and also potentially use that office to ingratiate themselves with foreign governments. So if they left office, they can then receive significant salaries, positions, or what have you with that foreign government. None of that applies to Trump. None of it whatsoever. And your point is it takes it even further. The guy can't be bought. He can't be bought. So none of this serves any policy interest. None of it serves any of the points that were debated at the Constitutional Convention. So here we have a couple of and they don't have standing. You can't say, hey, if that hotel didn't exist and the Trump world didn't own it, then these other hotels within our jurisdiction would be making more money. How tenuous is that? That's a ridiculous argument. All right, I've stymied you and silenced you with my genius. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be right back. Well, there was a filing yesterday by Mueller with the judge, sentencing recommendation in the case of Lieutenant General Flynn. And as you know, we hit it last night briefly. Mueller is proposing no prison time for General Flynn because of his quote-unquote substantial assistance early on and throughout his investigation. Now, this filing is 13 pages long with attachments, and I went through it. Out of the 13 pages, half of it, give or take, is redacted, in which Mueller is explaining the kind of assistance that Mr. Flynn gave. Now, based on that, the same media sources that have been wrong over and over and over again are telling us who has to worry. Don Jr. has to worry, one judicial analyst said, and he expects him to be indicted. No, who can make statements like this? I mean, somebody goes on TV or goes on radio and says they expect somebody to be indicted based on a 13-page filing, half of which is redacted. The unredacted parts don't even mention Don Jr., and yet this person asserts that Donald Trump Jr. is going to be indicted. And having asserted that, it spreads all over the internet. Or that Jared Kushner is going to be indicted. Based on what? Excuse me. Based on what exactly? Based on nothing. There's nothing in those 13 pages, half redacted, that makes any kind of a suggestion that either of those gentlemen will be indicted. Nothing. And yet it's thrown around out there by legal analysts. I think legal analysts, when they're given this title, they are now the dregs of the media. They're the dregs of the media. They're basically political analysts dressed up as legal analysts, because I haven't found any of them to be particularly useful in explaining legal matters, constitutional matters, and so forth. Oh, yes, I think he's going to be indicted. Oh. Then they drag out these former federal prosecutors who don't know any more than you and I know based on what we're reading. but it gives the patina of expertise and professionalism to what is a wholly biased or unsubstantiated opinion. Substantial assistance. So I have no idea what this is about. None of us have any idea what this is really about. Substantial assistance. We know General Flynn, based on media reports, had been in touch with the ambassador to the United States from Russia. Nothing wrong with that. Then there's another piece out there that says Jeff Sessions is in trouble because he may have had more contacts than are known, and Flynn may have outed him. Now, I suppose any of this is possible, but where do you get that out of this filing? Nowhere. It doesn't exist. On top of that, Mr. Producer, what cut is the Nadler cut? On top of that, I want you to hear this. Okay, so we've talked about the Emoluments Clause. Now we've talked about the Flynn filing, which tells us almost nothing because of the redactions. Now I want you to hear this guy Nadler, Gerald Nadler, who is going to be chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. This is a bad dude. He's a stupid dude, and he's a bad dude. He cares nothing of the Constitution, nothing of the rule of law. But listen to what he's thinking about. Go ahead.
I do not agree with the Office of Legal Counsel that the president cannot be indicted for crimes committed while in office. The Justice Department, however, is bound by that decision, by that opinion. The special counsel thinks considers himself bound for that.
All right. So everyone now agrees with me from 2 years ago. That's the Department of Justice position. The special counsel's bound by the Department of Justice position. So now listen to this. Go ahead.
Indict a president as a practical matter right now. But once the president is no longer president, you can indict him, but the statute of limitations may have run. Mm-hmm. So we ought to, and I'm considering introducing legislation to this effect, toll the statute of limitations on any president while he is president so that he can't be above the law. If he can't be impeached for improper conduct, if there are crimes, he should be made to be prosecuted.
Incoherent. What he's trying to say is that a president who may commit offenses while in office can be indicted once he's left office. That's true. But the statute of limitations may run on one or more of those charges. Therefore, he wants to propose legislation that tolls it or freezes the statute of limitations in the case of a president. Now, let me tell you folks something. One of the things that the framers of your Constitution feared was that Congress would abuse its power to impeach, which is why it required a supermajority to actually remove a president from office in the Senate, which is why it's not merely a political act. They talked about it at some length, particularly as it applies to a president, that is impeachment. It is a constitutional act. And the words in the Constitution have meaning, and they have context, and they have intent. So what Nadler's saying here is, okay, here's what we'll do. Okay, you can't indict a sitting president. I don't agree with that, he says, but that's the position. We're boxed in. That's where we are from his perspective. But let's change the law so that, or let's have a law specifically passed to apply to presidents that maybe they can't be indicted while they're in office, according to the Department of Justice, but we will extend the statute of limitations until they leave office. So what you'll have here, ladies and gentlemen, if he succeeds, is an endless effort now at unleashing prosecutors, a special counsel or whatever you want to call them, against sitting presidents like Mr. Mueller, who can fabricate or concoct allegations of illegality that hang over a president. So now they issue a report and they say, well, I cannot indict a sitting president. It is our intention to indict Mr. or Ms. So-and-so once they leave office for the following issues. So that hangs over a president and an administration and undermines many of the aspects that are in those Department of Justice memos, which say that the mere fact of indicting a president drags down the reputation of the administration, makes it much more difficult to conduct foreign policy, and so forth. So this is, again, opening a Pandora's box through the back door. Through the back door. To initiate endless investigations of presidents looking for criminal activity, as Mueller is doing, or alleging criminal activity, as Mueller may do. And then a Mueller can go even further and say, we intend to charge President XYZ once he leaves office with this, and this. How does that solve anything? And look how utterly irresponsible this guy is. He's going to be chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. He is a hatchet man. He's like an old Soviet apparatchik. He doesn't believe in justice. He doesn't believe in any of these things. He's of the same mindset as those Democrat senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee during the Kavanaugh hearings. They could care less about the Constitution. Moreover, if the House passes such a thing, I'm sure it'll die in the Senate. Or better. It better. I'll be right back. You know, Frederick Bastiat wrote what became a book called The Law. And it really was a classic blueprint for a free society. And absolutely brilliant young man. And he talked about the law perverted. The law perverted, and the police powers of the state perverted along with it. The law, I say, not only turned from its proper purpose, but made to follow an entirely contrary purpose. The law become, or that's the writing, the law become the weapon of every kind of greed. Instead of checking crime, the law itself, guilty of the evils it is supposed to punish. If this is true, it is a serious fact, and moral duty requires me to call the attention of my fellow citizens to it. What is law? What then is law? It is the collective organization of the individual right to lawful defense. Each of us has a natural right from God to defend his person, his liberty, and his property. These are the three basic requirements of life, and the preservation of any one of them is completely dependent upon the preservation of the other two. For what are our faculties but the extension of our individuality? And what is property but an extension of our faculties? If every person has the right to defend, even by force, his person, his liberty, and his property, then it follows that a group of men have the right to organize and support a common force to protect these rights constantly. Such is the principle of collective right. Thus, since an individual cannot lawfully use force against the person, liberty, or property of another individual, then the common force, for the same reason, cannot lawfully be used to destroy the person, liberty, or property of individuals or groups. Now, this is Bastiat. I want you to be thinking about this in terms of Mueller, in terms of Nadler, in terms of this judge in Maryland. Such a perversion of force would be, in both cases, contrary to our premise. Force has been given to us to defend our own individual rights. Who will dare say that force has been given to us to destroy the equal rights of our brothers? Unfortunately, law by no means confines itself to its proper functions. And when it has exceeded its proper functions, it has not done so merely in some inconsequential and debatable matters. The law has gone further than this. It has acted in direct opposition to its own purpose. The law has been used to destroy its own objective. It has been applied to annihilating the justice that it was supposed to maintain, to limiting and destroying rights, which its real purpose was to respect. The law has placed the collective force at the disposal of the unscrupulous, who wish without risk to exploit the person, liberty, and property of others. It has converted plunder into a right in order to protect plunder, and has converted lawful defense into a crime in order to punish lawful defense. How has this perversion of the law been accomplished? And what have been the results? The law has been perverted by the influence of two entirely different causes: stupid greed and false philanthropy. So what you're seeing here, in my opinion, the perversion of the Constitution, whether it's the Emoluments Clause, the Appointments Clause when it comes to Mueller, the accusations of obstruction of justice, which are inapplicable here. When you look at what's taking place in a federal courthouse in Maryland, ruled by a Clinton appointee on the Emoluments Clause, how he has twisted and turned the law on the Emoluments Clause and standing in order to accomplish his political aims. When you listen to Gerald Nadler saying we must now change the Constitution so we can indict presidents after they leave office if the statute of limitations has told, which would only strongly encourage more prosecutorial investigations of presidents the moment they walk into office. How does any of this serve the Republic? How does any of this serve the people, the public? How does any of this strengthen this nation, contribute to our prosperity and our national security and our well-being? This is what Washington is doing to us. The lawyers, the politicians, and the media. The new Iron Triangle. This is what they're doing to us. Because they don't like the man who was elected President of the United States. So the Constitution needs to be changed, if not flat out, by application. And abuses of power are celebrated if the abuses of power have as their purpose to destroy the existing administration and the individual who leads it. You cannot have a just and enduring legal system, constitutional system, when it is perverted this way. When it is perverted this way. And yet I fear this is a fatal tendency of mankind. Power, manipulation, positioning. But the Republic is the victim. And we, the citizens of the Republic, we become the victims. I'm not sure really what to do about it all, other than to ring the alarm bell. And it is really frustrating when you see these things reported on, almost in passing, almost with a blasé attitude, and then you get the legal analysts. Wittingly, if they're leftists, unwittingly, if they're just stupid, commenting on it, not from the perspective of the Republic and the Constitution, on whether or not Donald Trump Jr. is in trouble, whether or not the President of the United States is in trouble, whether or not it's really quite pathetic. I'll be right back. Mark, Vanderbilt, Michigan, XM Satellite. How are you?
Pretty good, except that I'm now by Grayling.
Yeah.
So anyway, I listen to your show occasionally. I'm on the road tonight, and you mentioned that there was a 15-page pleading filed in federal court.
No, I said it was 13 pages, but close.
13 pages, sorry, long day. Heavily redacted. And it to me, you said something about a 5K1 motion.
What?
Was that a 5K1 motion that was filed?
No, what was filed was a sentencing recommendation by the prosecutor to the court.
Okay.
Thanks for your call. I have no idea what this guy's talking about. Kevin, Des Moines, Iowa, Sirius Satellite, go.
Happy Hanukkah, Mark.
Thank you, sir.
My comment was on the Emoluments Clause and with what they're doing to President Trump. I was wondering why they couldn't turn that around and use that on all the other politicians that are getting rich off of all their dealings through their contacts with the government.
Well, many of the liberals get rich after they leave the government, and that's not covered by the Constitution. But if there are occasions where some are, it would work, because what's going to happen here is a precedent is going to be set, depending on how this plays out. And as I was discussing with the caller last hour, and he and I were going back and forth on this, if you're a member of Congress and you have extensive stock holdings, and those stock holdings include foreign companies, foreign investments of certain kinds, well, I suspect that arguments could be made.
Right.
Particularly if they're like state-owned companies. But keep something else in mind. It's not just foreign governments. It's states. State governments. So if you're a politician and you own a state bond, well, that may ensnare you too, right?
Right, exactly. That's kind of what I was thinking. If they can, like the other caller had stated, Yeah,
I think it's preposterous what the left is trying to do here. And a federal judge sits there. I mean, these people who take on these judgeships are supposed to really put aside all their politics and do the very best they can to apply the law. That's why they're lifetime appointees. That's why they're called Your Honor. That's why they get to wear black robes. That's why they're treated better than everybody else. And when they conduct themselves this way, they undermine the republic and they undermine their office. And so it's going to take a higher court to have to straighten this out, because this is just another form shopping operation where they obviously knew this judge would do what this judge is doing, and it's really appalling. And so it's a constant effort to burden, to undermine, to harass this president. Thank you for your call, sir. And it really is grotesque. Jay, Kansas City, Missouri, Sirius Satellite, go right ahead.
Hi, Mark. First-time caller. A
Thank
pleasure.
you.
I appreciate the time. Hey, my question is this chaos going on. What did our founders or our framers set up to protect the republic or the American people from this type of chaos going on?
Well, here's the problem. They set up a tremendous system of checks and balances to try and prevent one branch from controlling another, to try and prevent men of excess from having the ability to kind of undermine the entire system. But they also made it clear that liberty in and of itself cannot survive. That liberty must be undergirded by virtue. Remember, we talk about the civil society. The civil society is the prerequisite to a republic. If you don't have a civil society, you can't have a republic. What's happening now is the civil society is unraveling, because the left, these progressives, are using their positions as judges, as politicians, as media types, and academics to advance an ideology. All right, that's not virtuous. Virtue is these are the rules. Try and figure out what's intended. Apply them with justice. And whether you like the outcome or not, that's just too bad. But that's not what's happening right now, is it? What's happening right now is you'll have a federal judge, as in here in Maryland, and that federal judge determines that he's going to have a good time with the Emoluments Clause. This is the same federal judge who in his courtroom said that the word Redskins will not be allowed, and in any filing, the word Redskins will not be allowed. And nobody filed anything in his courtroom about the Redskins. It just shows you what kind of an agenda this guy has. Now, the problem is we have an impeachment clause, but we only use it against judges if they actually commit crimes, which is sort of the opposite with respect to a president. So if they actually commit crimes, and yet that's not what the impeachment clause says. Now, if you disagree with a judge, that shouldn't be the basis for impeachment, but if they abuse their power, that should be the basis for an impeachment. But you see the incoming chairman of the House Judiciary Committee is this guy, Gerald Nadler, who's a complete radical kook. So everywhere you turn, whether it's the chairman of the committee, whether it's this judge, whether it's Mueller and Rosenstein, what you're seeing here is a lack of virtue, a lack of individuals with virtue. Instead, they have their own agendas, and there's no system that can be set up to fix that. None. Thank you for your call, my friend. Donna, Frederick, Maryland, the great WMAL. Go.
Hi, Mark. I just want to say this Brian Bosch is a disgrace to the state of Maryland.
The Attorney General of Maryland.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. And I'm mortified that he actually did this. He does not represent the people of this state.
Well, he got elected.
Unfortunately. You know, there was a time, Mark, when Frederick to the west wanted to annex into the state of Western Maryland. It would not surprise me if that subject came up again. People are so tired of what's going on to the east of this city.
Mm-hmm. All right, my friend, I appreciate your call. Let's go to Frank in Reston, Virginia, also WMAL. Go right ahead.
Hi, Mark. It's good to talk to you.
Thank you.
I've long believed that the only, you have to bring a gun to a knife fight here. The only way that we're ever going to get this to stop is with the insertion of an attorney general who's going to go after the Clintons. And if it means another special prosecutor, it means another special prosecutor. We can't fight them. We can't fight the Democrats when they just play dirty on every play. We have to counter them at their level. And if the Clintons and the Obama connections to all this nonsense are potentially to be exposed, I think they'll back down from doing this stuff.
They have been shown, like the battle over the independent counsel statute many, many years ago, they have been shown that if you use their rules against them, then they want to sue for peace. And I think you're quite right. The problem is we have a president that fights them, that takes the gloves off, and then we have a party that shoots him in the back. You've got commentators on TV and radio who claim to be conservatives who shoot him in the back. Maybe they don't comprehend the existential nature of this battle. Maybe they think this is just an interesting debate, but it's much more than that. It's much more than that. We are very fortunate. Let me underscore this, because it's contrary to the so-called common wisdom out there. We're very fortunate to have a man in the Oval Office who is a fighter. Because I am convinced now more than ever that of all those Republicans running, all of them, that this is the only guy that could be fighting back the way that he's fighting back for the sake of the Republic. Doesn't mean you have to agree with every single one of his issues. That's not my point. I'm talking about the bigger picture. And I couldn't be happier. Couldn't be happier that he's there. And he has completely outperformed how I thought he would perform. And I admit it. But he's fighting back. You know, he's not arresting journalists like some presidents did. He's not shutting down newspapers like some presidents did. He's not arresting his opponents like some presidents did. He's not interning people like some presidents did. He goes on Twitter and he fights back. He holds a press conference and he fights back. He goes to a rally and he fights back. He's using exactly the legitimate tools freedom of speech to attack those who are attacking our system. I'll be right back. Brian, Dallas, Pennsylvania, the great WTRW. Go.
Hey, thanks for having me on. First of all, AMAC is great. Also, you switched over from being a blue dog Democrat during Obama's second term, and the thing I've had the most frustration with is what you just mentioned with the conservatives and Republican Party. They seem to just be a bunch of fiefdoms and backstab each other. You know, you can't seem to get together on the core issues that really create the foundation for the movement, and it's just frustrating.
It is. I mean, they ran on securing the border, and tell me, have they secured the border?
No, and we got live footage of it unsecure. When you have to use, pepper pellets to push people back, it should be strong evidence that there's a problem. So again, anyway, I try to keep up on speed on when there's events to go to and stuff like that. I joined the Convention of States, went to a couple of little meetings on that. But again, I think that's the biggest issue. And I love CRTV, good stuff.
Thank you.
And I'm glad to see we're, getting bigger. So thanks for the time. Let me have a chance to call.
You got it, Brian. You take care of yourself. Another Brian, Baltimore, Maryland. How are you, sir?
Mark, I'm doing well. Happy Hanukkah.
You too. Thank you.
If you'll indulge me, I am so filled with patriotic pride today when I watch the services for 41. And if you'll indulge me, I started this day off meeting with my local representatives about a development in my neighborhood.
You're a firefighter?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And this development is not going to fly. It's going to cause problems. I spoke to my people, to my representatives, and had my voice heard. I'm sitting in a parking lot right now eating fried chicken from the best fried chicken place, fast food you can have from a gas station, waiting for my kid to come out of school. I am in the greatest country in the world, in the history of the world. And listening to 43 eulogize 41 brought tears to my eyes. And I want all of us Levinites to understand we are in the fight of our lives. Right now, we must secure this republic from the nonsense that is going on from the Democrats, from the progressives, from the leftists. And we must stand strong because we are a great people, we are a fair people, we are a kind and generous people. And there is no better place on the face of the earth than this country, these United States of America, for anybody to live.
Well, you are 100% right, and I must tell you, when the nation unites like this, as it is, in the memories and the saying goodbye to President George H.W. Bush, it is a patriotic moment. And it's a sad moment and a celebratory moment. Sad in that it's the passing of a president, the passing of somebody we've become familiar with. And we celebrate because only in this country, do we treat presidents this way. Do we have respect for our system this way? Some of us, anyway.
Yes.
And to watch the military and the military bands and the military music and the music in the churches, it's just so beautiful. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
And you had five presidents, former and current president, in the National Cathedral. You had President Trump, President Bush, President Obama, President Clinton, and President Carter. You had five in one place like that. And I started to add up all the years together that these men were president. It is a remarkable thing.
And where else in the world do people do that, where they celebrate their people who lead them, who stand up for good and righteous things in the scope of the world?
Well, that's why our institutions are so crucial. And when you have individuals, including judges, including prosecutors, who are tearing at the fabric of this nation, they're tearing at exactly what you saw today. I want to thank you, Brian, and thank you for your service as a firefighter, too. We'll be right back.